My stepmother thought she'd scored the ultimate payday when my father passed away. At the funeral, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "Don't worry, dear, I'll handle all the messy finances." What she didn't know was that my dad saw her coming from a mile away. 6 months before he died, he transferred his entire $40 million tech portfolio directly into an irrevocable trust in my name. I stayed quiet, rented a small apartment, and let her believe she'd won it all. But when she realized the estate bank accounts were bone dry, she barged into my workplace with a high-powered corporate lawyer, demanding I hand over her money. She expected me to crumble. Instead, I pulled out a single manila folder that made her lawyer's jaw drop and turned her victory parade into a total nightmare. My name is Chloe Vance. I'm 28 years old, and if you saw me working out of a local coffee shop in my faded hoodie and jeans, you'd probably guess I was just another struggling freelance designer trying to pay off student loans. And that was entirely by design. My dad, Arthur Vance, was a brilliant software founder who made tens of millions, but he brought me up with a grounded set of values: humility over flash and substance over show. Everything changed 5 years ago when Evelyn walked into his life. 20 years younger than my father, Evelyn was a masterclass in synthetic elegance. She wore designer logos like armor and viewed every relationship as a high-stakes transaction. Within months of marrying my dad, she began subtly pushing me out of the frame, assuming that because I didn't flaunt money, I was naive, timid, and completely clueless about business. I never corrected her. I kept a low profile, nodded quietly at her patronizing remarks during family dinners, and let her believe I was just a broke, harmless 20-something living paycheck to paycheck. I let her think she was the smartest person in the room, holding all the cards. But what Evelyn failed to realize was that behind my quiet exterior was a daughter who understood the corporate world just as well as my father did, and we were both watching her every move. The shift happened 18 months ago when my dad called me late one Tuesday evening. His voice lacked its usual booming energy. The doctors had just delivered the news: an aggressive, stage 4 diagnosis with a timeline measured in months, not years. But my father wasn't just grieving his health. He was sharp enough to notice how Evelyn's behavior instantly shifted from devoted wife to quiet auditor. She had already begun subtly probing his accountants, asking detailed questions about liquidity, real estate deeds, and offshore accounts. She was preparing for the payday before the fight had even officially begun. That weekend, Dad bypassed his regular family attorneys and arranged a private, off-the-books meeting at a firm 2 hours outside the city. Sitting in that dimly lit conference room, he looked me in the eye and handed me a pen. "Evelyn married my net worth, Chloe," he said calmly. "Not me. I won't let her dismantle everything we built." Over the next 3 hours, we executed a series of bulletproof legal maneuvers. Dad transferred his entire $40 million technology investment portfolio, primary liquid reserves, and commercial real estate holdings directly into an irrevocable trust, naming me as the sole trustee and beneficiary. It was completely legal, fully taxed, and entirely locked away. Before we left, Dad grabbed my shoulder with a final, strict instruction: when the time comes, say nothing. Claim nothing. Let her believe she's won, and let her own greed expose her through the probate process. I gave him my word. I drove home with a signed $40 million paperwork locked in my trunk, ready to play the longest, quietest game of my life. When my father passed away, Evelyn didn't even wait for the funeral flowers to wilt before stepping into her new role as the grieving, commanding widow. Dressed in head-to-toe designer black, she glided through the reception with an air of tragic royalty. But the moment the last guest left, her sorrow evaporated. She cornered me near the foyer, looked me dead in the eye, and said in that overly sweet, patronizing tone, "Don't worry yourself with practical matters, dear. I'll take control of the estate and handle all the messy bank accounts." I swallowed hard, forced a timid nod, and played the part of the shattered, helpless daughter to perfection. I let her believe she was in total command. 2 days later, the real show began. Evelyn marched into my dad's primary bank, expecting to find tens of millions sitting in liquid accounts waiting for probate. Instead, she was met with a staggering reality check. The balance showed a meager $40,000, just enough to cover basic property maintenance and minor expenses for a couple of months. I watched from a distance as her polished composure began to crack. She called me frantically, demanding to know where my father kept his real money, insisting there must be hidden accounts, vault keys, or secret investments. I kept my voice trembling over the phone, stammering through fake confusion, pretending I knew nothing about his finances. The more clueless I acted, the more her quiet panic spiraled into absolute desperation. 2 weeks after the funeral, Evelyn decided to stop waiting for probate. I was sitting in the open lounge of my co-working space, working on a client design project, when the heavy glass doors swung open. Evelyn strode in, her heels clicking loudly against the concrete floor. But she wasn't alone. Walking beside her was Mr. Sterling, a high-stakes corporate probate attorney known in the city for his ruthlessness and sharp three-piece suits. Conversation in the lounge died down instantly as Evelyn pointed a manicured finger right at my face. "There she is," she announced, her voice echoing off the exposed brick walls. The ungrateful daughter trying to rob her father's memory. I slowly took off my headphones and stood up, keeping my face completely calm while heads turned across the room. Sterling stepped forward, opening a leather briefcase with theatrical precision and pulling out a formal legal notice. He didn't just hand it to me. He read the key points aloud for maximum public humiliation. He accused me of financial elder abuse, claiming I had illegally manipulated my dying father into hiding assets, draining his accounts, and depriving his lawful wife of her rightful inheritance. "You have 48 hours to hand over every financial statement, password, and property record in your possession," Sterling warned, his eyes cold and calculating. "If you refuse, we will file a public, ruinous lawsuit that will tie you up in court for the rest of your life and bankrupt you before you ever see a dime." Evelyn smirked behind him, convinced that bringing a high-powered lawyer to my workplace would break me. I simply looked at the document, nodded, and said, "I'll see you in court." 48 hours later, Evelyn and Mr. Sterling walked into the high-rise office building downtown. They expected to find a trembling 28-year-old ready to surrender. Instead, they were greeted by my estate attorney, David Vance, and seated in a soundproof glass conference room overlooking the city skyline. Evelyn sat down with a triumphant smirk, crossing her legs and placing her designer handbag on the mahogany table. Sterling opened his briefcase, ready to dictate terms. "Let's make this simple," Sterling began, leaning forward with aggressive confidence. "Your client surrenders all concealed financial records today, or we file the elder abuse petition before noon." I didn't say a word. I simply pulled a thick manila folder from my bag, slid it across the polished wood, and let the quiet room do the talking. Sterling picked up the document with a dismissive sigh, flipping to the first page. But as his eyes scanned the text, his posture visibly stiffened. The smug smile on Evelyn's face slowly faltered as she watched her attorney's face turn an ash-gray color. Inside was the complete, airtight record of the irrevocable trust my father had established 6 months before his death. Sterling flipped through the pages frantically, checking the timestamps, notary seals, and tax filings. The entire $40 million portfolio, the tech stocks, the liquid reserves, the commercial real estate, had been legally transferred well before my dad's health declined. It was fully taxed, completely binding, and entirely outside the reach of probate or marital estate claims. Sterling closed the folder slowly, adjusted his silk tie, and turned to Evelyn with a look of sheer defeat. "Evelyn," he whispered, "we need to step outside right now." Evelyn refused to move. "What do you mean step outside?" she snapped, her voice cracking as her composure shattered. "She stole my husband's money. Fix this." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the mahogany table. "He didn't just protect his assets, Evelyn. He protected himself from you." I pulled out a single, final document from my folder and slid it toward Sterling. "You might want to review Section 4 of my father's prenup." Sterling's hands actually shook as he read the clause aloud. My dad had inserted a strict, ironclad, no-contest provision. If Evelyn ever attempted to contest his estate, fraudulently claim assets shielded in trust, or launch legal attacks against his daughter, she would instantly trigger an immediate forfeiture clause. By bringing a lawyer to my workplace, accusing me of financial elder abuse, and threatening a public lawsuit to seize trust assets, Evelyn had legally breached the prenuptial agreement. The color completely drained from Evelyn's face as the reality hit her like a physical blow. The modest monthly stipend, the right to live in the primary house for 2 years, and the small spousal allowance my dad had generously left her, all of it was gone. She hadn't just failed to get the $40 million, she had legally stripped herself of everything she had left. Sterling didn't even try to fight it. He quietly closed his briefcase, looked at his client, and said, "Evelyn, there is nothing left to defend. If we stay in this room, you'll be liable for their legal fees as well." Evelyn stared at me in stunned, speechless horror, realizing that the quiet girl she had patronized for 5 years had just dismantled her entire life with a single manila folder. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn's world completely unraveled. Unable to afford the high-powered legal team she had hired to destroy me, she was forced to settle her outstanding bills, sell off her luxury wardrobe, and downsize to a small one-bedroom apartment on the edge of a city. As for me, I didn't buy sports cars or move into a penthouse. I used a portion of the $40 million inheritance to establish the Arthur Vance Technology Foundation, a mentorship program dedicated to funding young, brilliant entrepreneurs who value substance over flash, exactly the way my father lived his life. Standing at the foundation's launch event, looking at his portrait hanging in the main lobby, I knew I had honored his memory in the best way possible. Sometimes, the loudest victories are won in complete silence. My stepmother spent years assuming my quiet nature was a sign of weakness, never realizing that patience and preparation are the ultimate power. Now, I'm curious about your thoughts. If you were put in my position, would you have given your stepmother a second chance? Or would you have let the trap collapse just like I did? Drop a comment below and let me know. I'd love to read your take. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories, and click the video on your screen to keep watching.